We're going to go ahead and get started. Our presenters are here already. They are Patrick Perry and Dr. Rebecca Ryson. So thank you. Please hold your applause. But
clapping for Rebecca.
Oh, okay. Should have known. Thank you. Man, I've never been in the spotlight like that. That's a good one. I like that, Jordan. Thank you. We're going to talk a little bit to you today about emotional intelligence. I'll refer to it sometimes as EI, mindset, and grit. And I'm excited actually today to talk about it with Professor Rebecca Ryson because she's an expert in grit. And then we also have some others in the audience that I know have been researching and studying grit and have really helped me in the last couple of months, I guess, in terms of that. But I'll start with emotional intelligence and mindset, and then I'll let Professor Ryson talk more about the grit component. And I want to give you a little background. The reason that this is of interest to me is working with the Lucky Day program. We have about 75, 80 scholars each year. And what we found is that this university and our programming and so many stakeholders on campus provide resources for students to be successful. And those resources are so extensive and exciting and new every year. But sometimes we have students that just, they don't get through. And so I've struggled along with other colleagues to kind of figure out, are there some other things out there? And what came up were sometimes classified as soft skills. And you've probably heard that, which I don't like that because soft kind of indicates that it's not important to me sometimes. But these are skills that employers are looking for. And emotional intelligence is one of the biggies that's been out there for a while, and mindset and grit. And we'll talk about some of the researchers and folks that are on the cutting edge of that. But this is to give you a broad overview. And then I have some examples, some things you might be able to incorporate in the classroom, as does Professor Ryson, that you can use with your students. And I think that's very important. And then maybe some of the folks that are researching it have some ideas too. That are here with us today. So just an outline, I'm going to talk about emotional intelligence, define it and the importance. We'll talk about mindset, same thing, defining and importance, grit, and then discussion and questions. So I put this in because it really depicts a lot of different folks expressing different emotions. And one of the things that I've found in my life is that I'm a very emotional person. And you may have the same type of emotion that I do, or you might, be in more control of your emotions than I am. One of the things that is very much a struggle, and I think back to my past, is when I was younger, I was definitely not as in control as I am maybe today. And that's very obvious in terms of as you go through experiences, you react differently, and you may be in different situations all the time, but we all react differently. I may cry over something, whereas you would not. I may laugh, you may not. And that just makes us unique. So students that we work with are the same way. They differ very individually, and it's important to pay attention to those differences in terms of emotion. So just some pictures of that. So what is emotional intelligence? Now, I'm going to use Salovey and Meyer's definition because I like it the best. The ability to monitor your own and others' feelings and emotions, to use that information, that's a big part, to use the information to guide your thinking and your actions. So you're emotional, but you're in control and you're thinking about it. And many of you have jobs where you're under stress and you have emotions going all the time and you have to look at things objectively. How many of y'all have jobs like that? I think we all in this room do. So, and some jobs are more stressful than others in terms of decision making and having to do things from an objective standpoint. So I like this definition. Many times we've been introduced to intelligence, the intelligence quotient. We look at the ACT score or the SAT score for, in terms of ability for students attending college. The IQ measures, and this is a definition that I pulled out of the Webster's Dictionary just for convenience, a number used to express the apparent relative intelligence of a person. A score determined the ratio of the mental to the chronological age multiplied by 100 based on one's performance on a standardized intelligence test relative to the average performance of others of the same age. So that's IQ. And then we look at emotional intelligence, and it's measured as EQ, and there's some instruments that can do that to kind of give a person a feel for maybe areas in which they would have challenges and areas in which they have strengths. I say all this because it's great that we have students that have high ability and they have a high IQ. But employers are looking for this: leadership, creativity, and problem solving, being a team player, accepting responsibility, working under pressure, communication, making decisions under stress, showing commitment, flexibility, and time management. Now, some of those may have some connection to IQ, but a lot of those are in the soft skills category and things that you develop over time, right? So that's why this is important to all of us, because it gets us where we need to go. Employers are constantly, and the Career Center validates this, and employers validate this, that they want folks coming in that have skills like these. And the other stuff can be taught a lot of times. Now, I know there are exceptions to that. Skills associated with high levels of emotional intelligence are understanding and managing your emotions better, help you effectively interact with others to achieve goals. You're more effective in your decision making, as we mentioned, and stress management skills, which enhances success and happiness. So these are all good things that come from a better sense of emotional intelligence. What we did a few years back, we surveyed, we had an instrument we used to kind of look at emotional intelligence with students at the university, and we found, and I'm not going to cover all the different aspects because we don't have time today, but these are the ones that students at the university and in the survey we used said were areas in which they felt challenged. And they were impulse control, stress tolerance, problem solving. So, and I hate to do this is just awful, but we're going to have a break and y'all can come get some candy, but right now I'm going to test your impulse control. Okay, good. I'm real close on that level right now because I need chocolate about 2:30 or 3. So if I jump over there, but stress tolerance and problem solving, these are the three that students indicated through the measuring tool that we were looking at. And it's like, okay, yes, that makes sense. They're in college. A lot of them are in their first, the ones that you're teaching in this class or first year or new to the university through transfer in the 305 class. So these are things they're dealing with. In the 305 section said self-regard, which is something too that students struggle with in general. Emotional self-awareness and emotional expression. So, maybe that group, and like I said, this isn't a huge sample size, but maybe there are differences obviously that we're looking at. And that's one of the things that emotional intelligence and doing a deep search, and not only with emotional intelligence, but with mindset and with grit too, is these things take a lot of self-reflection, self-analysis, acknowledgement of areas in which you're really strong, and then areas in which you might thrive better if you exercised a little differently in some different ways. So anyway, that's why this is kind of something that's interesting. And what I'll give you, and I don't want to jump to, let me go. One of the things with IQ is it stops at a certain level in your 20s where you're not going to be able to push that IQ any higher. But with emotional intelligence, it goes throughout the lifetime. So you can develop control of your emotions throughout your lifetime. And I definitely can see that in some of the actions that I've taken in my past versus today. So that is one of the big things with emotional intelligence. And I have a little scenario that I'll give to you. It's an ABCDE model that if you want to use with your students, and it's related to kind of impulse control issues. A is action or event, B is beliefs, C is consequences, D is disputing facts, and E is effects. And this model basically gives you an example and talks about a guy and a girl, and they're separated during college, and the guy's waiting for the girl to come home so that they can get together, and because they were friends and boyfriend, girlfriend. So the first scenario is he sees the car in the driveway where she's actually come home, but she has not called him yet. This is really important too when we talk about social media, and these days it's an instant gratification type scenario. So anyway, he starts getting worried and forms some beliefs. and says she's lost interest in me. I bet she's dating another guy. All this stuff that's coming in, which we call emotional hijacking, right? And that's in the literature too. We're letting emotions run away with us in terms of what's going on that's impacting our decision making and reality check. And then the emotions, the consequences, going through sadness and maybe anger. This is a bad thing. I'm upset with her. And, this keeps going for a period of time. And then the D part is really, really big, where hopefully the person starts rationalizing and saying, well, maybe something's going on. We weren't in a fight. Things are going well. Maybe she's talking to her parents. Maybe something's going on. And then E is the effects of that. After going through that process, the person's more relaxed. In the book that this is presented in, it talks about how, she just didn't call. She went to take a nap before she called anybody. So, this scenario is something that's kind of good. And you can formulate your own scenario how you want to, but it's a good exercise to go through assumption. And something's happened, and it may not be how you depict it. It may be a different picture there. So, and this kind of just deals with impulse control, but it's one of the things that a lot of times students and I struggle with. So anyway, so questions about emotional intelligence. I like to use the Antoinette Tuff story. If we had a lot more time, I would go through this in detail. But Antoinette Tuff exercised emotional intelligence when there was a mass shooting. Well, not a mass shooting, but could have been a mass shooting in a school near Atlanta. And she happened to be subbing that day in the school when the gunman, Michael Hill, came into the school. And her first reaction was, I can't imagine what she went through, but she was on the 911 call when you hear her calling, frantic, emotional. There's a gunman in the school. She was reporting everything to the 911 operator and really frantic through all this period. He's firing off some shots. The police start coming around the school building, and you can imagine all this going on. And only a few minutes into the scenario, though, and I encourage you to listen to the 911 tape because it's about 12 minutes, 13 minutes long. And she, at one point during the conversation, says, "That must have been difficult for you. Sounds like to me this person that you're talking to on your cell phone cares," because she started engaging with someone on the phone that had called. The empathy there expressed made an impact, and that whole conversation changed. And over a period of about 12 to 14 minutes, she was able to get him to surrender, and no one was hurt. And she utilized her skills in communication because she was a person and she related to Michael Hill as a person to get him to do that. And I like to use that example just because it's such an intense situation, and yet the resolution is so positive. And, had she not been there that day at the school, someone else might have reacted. In fact, in the 911 tape, there's a point at which he steps out and she goes, "Can I run?" But she doesn't. Had she run, it might have turned out differently. But she connected with this Michael Hill gentleman to talk him through, and he had gone through a lot. That's her quote. Everyone goes through something in life, and she got to that with him. She started talking about her life and how she had been divorced and how she had considered hurting herself and gone through that. But then she made positive connections too about how they had a connection at the school and that she cared about him, and she said that. So the difference in what she did from a positive to a negative outcome is just tremendous. So again, I don't have time to go through that, but it's a scenario you might talk to your class about depending, because the presentation of it, I've shown or I've played the 911 tape before at presentations, and it's very impactful, it's very intense. Sometimes I get emotional, so I'm like, oh wow. So, I know that students will. Related to emotional intelligence, and this is actually when Rebecca starts talking about grit, she will go through this, but mindset. And this is a concept that Carol Dweck, her book, Mindset, and I'm going to read the title because I think the title is very, very important. The New Psychology of Success, How We Can Learn to Fulfill Our Potential. And the key word being learn. How we can learn to fulfill our potential. And that's what mindset is about. It's about understanding that what you're going through, if can be temporary if it's failure. And students coming into college and experiencing the trials and errors of college, changing from the culture of high school, it can be a huge thing. And so mindset's the belief that your basic qualities are things you can cultivate through effort versus ability, right? We were talking about that a little earlier. So she talks about two mindsets. Again, I'm summarizing her book, but fixed versus growth. When challenges are presented, a person with a fixed mindset tends to think that they don't have the capability to overcome that. Whereas someone with a growth mindset says, I can't do it now, but I can in the future. I can get there with effort. Same is true with obstacles. An obstacle is presented, it's the thought process of whether I can get through it or not, and based on whether I've had it innately or it's something that can be developed. And with effort. Criticism. A person with a fixed mindset doesn't take criticism very well. A person with a growth mindset understands that there can be improvements being made that they can facilitate. The success of others, a person with a fixed mindset is typically jealous of others' accomplishments, whereas someone with a growth mindset understands that and accepts it and says, hey, that's awesome that you're doing that. I can learn from this and I can be better. These concepts are so important, and I hate to go over them very fast, but for time's sake, we do. Deliberate practice is a part of that. And I put up two of my favorite basketball players. You may remember the Allen Iverson saying, practice, practice, practice. Are we talking about practice when someone was asking about missing practice? But Michael Jordan self-admittedly says that he, during 1 year of his NBA career, was not taking it seriously. And even at his level and ability, that year the Bulls struggled. So deliberate practice is about doing things over and over repeatedly so that you become a master and an artist at it. One of the things that I learned to do when I was in 8th grade was to juggle. And because I saw a teacher do it, and I was so impressed that I needed to learn how to juggle, and I was obsessed with it. I had to learn how to do it. And I was not, and still am not, that agile of a person, but I got some tennis balls and I started practicing. One of the things that I learned early was that tennis balls pop out of your hands very easy, but bean bags land easier in your hand and they move a little bit. So I learned how to juggle and how to do things that were juggling like, and so left, and thank you. I'm here all day. So but one of the things that, in some of the examples, I put the Bronte sisters up there because when they were young, they drew pictures. Those of you that are familiar with the literature, they wrote stories, but all of it was awful. It was bad. But they kept doing it over and over and over and over again. The book's on grit and mindset. They give great sports examples about over repeatedly, and then changing too at the same time to get better. That's where the growth mindset plays a big part because, after a while juggling, I was doing things wrong and I figured out, hey, it's not about speed, it's about accuracy. When you start juggling, it's not about doing it fast, even though that's what we want to do because our bodies think, okay, I got to get it. So it's real funny when you start, it's like you're over here, but it's putting it in the same place every time. And then moving from there. Now, growth mindset, I stalled out at 4 balls. I can do 4 balls. And I stalled out at 3 pins. I can do pins. But there were people in my class that I took that could throw pins across the room at each other. And it was awesome. At the time, I was jealous because I had fixed mindset. So anyway, now that I'm 83, it doesn't matter. But anyway, but that's important to remember. So, but that's important to remember that the change and the adaptation, and especially with top athletes. And I know that Serena Williams is one of my tennis heroes in terms of the fact that over age, as she's gotten older, she's adjusted her game because she's had to. And she has that competitive spirit. She gets beat, but then you can tell she's very gracious about it, but then you can also tell just looking at her, oh, she's a little upset because it eats at her. She wants to be the best and the artist at that. So, but having deliberate practice or doing it requires you to set the goal, and it needs to be specific. Concentrate on that single task, get feedback, and make sure it's informative feedback, and practice repetitively until fluent. And that's what the Bronte sisters did over time. And if you see, and that's one of the things, again, when you think about, was it with me when I got here, or did it develop over time? And so the exercises that students can do in developing habits, which is one of the things that I think is really important. I'm going to give you a sheet. It's a 30-day quit or commit challenge sheet. And Human Resources gave this out several years ago. I think maybe Andrea Jacobson, some others developed it. But it's just set down 3 things that you're going to do for 30 days, and you're going to do it for 30 days. And I did this with soda. And I'm off that now because I drink soda a little bit more than I used to. But I said I was going to drink 1 a week. And then every day I would check, and each week I'd go through and I'd mark off if I had done it or not. But over time that habit developed, but it took that effort. And that's something that really I think students can benefit from. And it's for September, so it gives them about a week in school so they can do whatever they want and then set it up for September and go on from there. But it's just something that might be beneficial. So I'll use the example of the Daytona 500 results for this spring just because it demonstrates growth mindset. And Carol Dweck's research, she researched race car drivers and found that during the course of an event that's hours long, multiple decisions are made and multiple mistakes are made and multiple good calculations are made. But in the end, it can come down to 0.228 of a second between the winner and the person that finished in second over a period of time. And I think it's a good example for students to understand that all that effort, all those things, and maybe the difference was taking a pit stop on a certain lap versus another lap, or estimating the fuel economy of the vehicle in a certain way, which also is a good team example because NASCAR and other team sports, because it makes a big difference when you have people calculating your gas mileage and they tell you versus you doing it yourself. So I think that it's a good example of team effort towards fulfilling victory. And interestingly enough, which sometimes I get into a debate with myself and others about this, when a race car driver finishes a race, when they interview them, usually when they finish, they start talking about the team. I got lucky. I mean, a lot, and they're serious because they're like, man, if I had done this, it would have been different. It just happened. And it's incredible to hear that because with all that effort, and that's something students can really benefit from hearing, sometimes it doesn't work out. And so that's something that they have to grapple with and understand. So anyway, those are the reports. Man, I was like 1.5 seconds. It's just so fast. So I like the quote, and I made this one up. Failure is an option and maybe in the long run, a somewhat not awful option. You can kill my English on that because it's not good, but I think that's something that presented to students in the right way, it needs to be there. Failure is something that can be a benefit, and Carol Dweck talks about that with mindset, and it's something that can be overcome through understanding better that this is not the final answer. It's a starting point. It didn't happen this time, but down the road, it might. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Professor Ryson for grit now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Patrick.
Sure.
All right.
switch.
Yeah, good to see you all. And so for grit, which I'm a huge Angela Duckworth fan. I'm sorry for the Center for Student Success folks who've heard me talk about Angela Duckworth for 5,000 times, but let me just share a little anecdote. I knew I'd been talking way too much about grit at my household for 2 different reasons. Reason number 1, I had taken a selfie with Angela Duckworth, which of course I was very excited about. We all got to meet her at the First Year Experience Conference. And I put it in a frame, and lo and behold, I did not find that frame at all until I was spring cleaning. And I realized no one at my house wanted to see it anymore because I talked so much about it. Did you see? I met Angela Duckworth? Okay. Yeah, so much so that it's put into the cupboards. Number two, I don't know if you've ever played this game, if any of you all have children, but my 12-year-old was like, Mom, let's play this game where we guess the celebrity. And you can have a little app on your iPhone, and it talks about, okay, does this celebrity have brown hair? Does this celebrity a female? Blah, blah, blah. So she's like, Mom, let's play this game. I'm like, great, let's do it. Is it Selena Gomez? No, it's Angela Duckworth. I was like, what? This is so, okay, all right, that's great. So in times when you think you may not be getting your message across to your students, they're listening, and I can guarantee that they will be excited to hear about grit, and hopefully y'all will be here too. So with grit, I'm not talking about the grits you get at City Grocery. Those are fantastic as well. I'm talking about passion and perseverance to achieve very long-term goals. So this is not just resilience where somebody is having a difficult time and bounces back from that time. This is more of like I don't want to say it's calculated, but it's a long-term trying to get to some sort of vision and plan, and having a lot of things happen. You can use resilience to bounce back from adversity and still have a lot of grit. But this is more of trying to figure out what you're really passionate about and pursuing that option. Of course, Angela Duckworth has really cultivated this in her research. She's looked a lot at the award-winning National Spelling Bee recipients. She's looked at the military West Point graduates to take a look. And of course, these people are pretty gritty overall. These are like the paragons of grit. And what's interesting to think about is how we define this. How do we really measure something like grit? Well, she has a 12-item grit questionnaire, which you can find online, which I'll talk to you about here in a little bit. But I'm curious to see if you know about grit and if you can recognize maybe some celebrities or big-name people who are pretty gritty. Maybe you can recognize this quote. "I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. And obstacles don't have to stop you. If you run into a wall, don't turn around and give up. Figure out how to climb it, go through it, or work around it." Does anyone know who this is?
Michael Jordan.
Okay, who said that? Oh, great. Okay, perfect. All right. So Michael Jordan said these quotes as well. "Champions do not become champions when they win an event, but in the hours, weeks, and months and years they spend preparing for it. The victorious performance itself is merely a demonstration of their championship character. Last but not least, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. Just play. Obstacles don't have to stop you. I can accept failure. Everyone fails at something. Some people want it to happen. Some wish it would happen. Others make it happen." And I was looking at these quotes, and Michael Jordan, what's interesting is we have done a lot of discussions about grit over time and at various conferences. So I was thinking about Michael Jordan as being a very big paragon of grit. And then you were as well. We kind of touched base and was like, oh yeah, we both think Michael Jordan is pretty gritty. You can kind of think of big name people as having a lot of grit. But how do they actually get past all these obstacles that they've had? I just kind of, as a kid, envisioned Michael Jordan as having a really easy time. He could just make all the hoops, no problem. But in fact, I know there's that thing about how he was cut from, I think, his high school basketball team. He's not exactly had a perfect career development process, as you can tell from this last quote. Missing 9,000 shots, that's a lot, but that's also the top person out of a whole field. And so when we think about Michael Jordan, of course he's very accomplished, there's a lot of that passion there. And I think that's the key thing with grit. When we think about success, it seems kind of amorphous. How does someone become successful? And if there's anything you've tried really hard at, you realize that you can be really good at something, you can have a lot of talent. That doesn't necessarily mean that award is going to get handed to you or that you're going to get everything that you desire, even though that would be great. So taking a look at stuff like this, of course, Dr. Duckworth says we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. And that's what I really like about grit, because I think in a lot of societies, there's a lot of emphasis to always do something perfectly, right? Whenever kids get applauded for something, perfect attendance. Has anyone ever gotten perfect attendance here? If so, I'm super impressed, because that means you have? Yes? Oh, that's so great. Okay. I wish I was one of those kids. I invariably got sick or a sinus infection or something, so I was like, oh, well, shoot, now I can't get perfect attendance. But when it comes to life, life gives us a lot of things that we just try to do well at. And sometimes we have to, as a counselor, I guess I look at this as working with a lot of students who've had lower grades, work with the at-risk students. So they've had a lot of low grades, but they've really been very resilient at trying to push forward despite really difficult life circumstances. And so what I try to tell a lot of my at-risk folks, and also my 105s, is it's okay to make mistakes. I'm not saying go jump off a bridge and be like wondering what happens afterwards. We know what happens with that kind of scenario. But you want to do things that kind of get you outside of your comfort zone. And with being an EDHE 105, 305 faculty member, what's really great is that we can also tell this to ourselves. It's okay sometimes to try a new lesson, a new activity, and really experiment with it and see how it goes. Of course, it's great to have it be empirically supported or something we know that works really well, but having a creative side is key because that gives you a lot of passion for what you do. And we invariably have a lot of grit because we're passionate about helping students, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And again, Thomas Edison, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. And just having worked with a lot of students over time, I think a lot of them come in thinking, okay, I'm going to get my degree, I'm going to go make this huge paycheck afterwards, everything's going to be all figured out, I'm going to have a car and a house and 2.5 children and the white picket fence. And then invariably something happens along those lines. And they just try to keep figuring themselves out, maybe switching their major, maybe they have a breakup, maybe they have all these different medical circumstances happen. But giving up, that's the thing, that's when the journey stops. And so I think we as faculty members do such a great job, and 105 and 305 are such great courses because we're helping students develop grit. We're helping them even when they want to give up. So being a part of that process, and I love this illustration because in both cases, no one really knows what's going to happen, but this poor guy down here, he's like just, an inch away from getting all these diamonds. And this guy keeps going, even though neither of them really know what the outcome is. You never know how close you are, so never give up on your dreams. But as faculty members, I think that's the key thing that we have to remind ourselves. Sometimes we don't know what the impact is that we're making on our students, but rest assured you are making an impact. It is a big thing that we're doing here in trying to help students develop grit. And then, of course, recognizing that life, like Angela Duckworth says, is a marathon, not a sprint. And there's a lot of, I think in our society, we are really connected to the internet and getting things done quickly. And oh my goodness, the hamburger I ordered 2 minutes ago is not ready. It's all these things where developing patience, self-control helps us with that grit. And recognizing that it takes time. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned in that process. But really what keeps it going is that passion. What I think also is a really cool paragon of grit is Will Smith, and so we'll take a look here at his video. Any Will Smith fans out there?
Is whether or not there is something special and unique about you that everybody can emulate.
I have this question, this discussion with friends of mine.
Right.
All the time. The only thing that I can see, if you never really look at yourself, the only thing that I see that is distinctly different about me is I'm not afraid to die on a treadmill. Right? I will run.
You would not be outworked.
I will not be outworked.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
You might have more talent than me. You might be smarter than me, you might be sexier than me, you might be all of those things, you got it on me in 9 categories. But if we get on the treadmill together, right, there's 2 things. You're getting off first, or I'm gonna die. It's really that simple, right? So, let's go back to the question about whether people block me out. There's gonna be 2 options.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get back in, or I'm gonna be dead.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, you're not going to outwork me. It's such a simple, basic concept. It's the guy who is willing to hustle the most is going to be the guy that just gets that loose ball. You know, he got that. Oh, okay, he got two. He hustily grabbed that one. That was going to be out of bounds, but he saved it back in. It's like the commodity that I see the majority of people who aren't getting the places they want or aren't achieving the things that they want in this business is strictly based on hustle. It's strictly based on being outworked. It's strictly based on missing crucial opportunities. I say all the time, if you stay ready, you ain't gotta get ready.
All right. So I think that's great, and you can sense his enthusiasm, right? Which I think is really cool. But he makes some really good points here that
I've never really viewed
sorry.
myself as particularly
That's okay.
talented. I view myself as, slightly above average in talent. And where I excel is.
Thank you. Okay, so what I like about Will Smith is that he acknowledges the fact that he may not be the most talented. I think he's super talented, super smart. But it's interesting to think about Angela Duckworth stuff where she's found, just looking at her studies and her research, that GPA is sometimes, grit is sometimes inversely correlated with intelligence and talent. And so that's interesting because I think it comes from that I'm going to work hard no matter what. I'm going to work hard even when there are obstacles and setbacks. And sometimes people who are really brilliant and who are really talented just kind of say, hey, I'm pretty good, so I'm just not going to work that hard. And that's when you have, it's like the turtle and the hare, right? So that's interesting to think about that kind of dynamic. Other things that are interesting to think about in terms of how we measure this, we have some stuff that we're doing here at the University of Mississippi. And so Patrick and I are collaborating, and then with Dewey as well, and my husband in the psychology department, we've looked at grit and taking a look at academically at-risk students versus non-at-risk students, and working with a journal to potentially try to publish this. But we're looking at how grit kind of shapes out in different populations. So we looked at the psychology folks who were in general kind of non-at-risk, and then EDHE 101 and 303, which are different classes than this, of course, but sometimes students end up in those classes. Usually the ones who take 105, by the way, don't end up in those classes, which I think are, is testimony to the fact that we're really helping them out a lot. But we wanted to take a look to see what kind of relationship there was with grit and GPA, and also are academically at-risk students less gritty than their peers? Well, what we found was, in terms of grit overall, there was a very small but significant difference. And the max kind of score you can get on this assessment, if you add up these 12 items and average them out, the max score you can get is 5, and the lowest you can get is 1. So taking a look at grit overall here, the non-at-risk, we had 177 folks, and then the at-risk, 127. 3.31 was the average score for the non-at-risk, and the at-risk was 3.13. Now, that is, at the 0.01 level, not to get too statistical here, but that is significant and in a good way. However, it's not so great that it's like, okay, the at-risk students are like a 1 and the non-at-risk are a 5. It's not such a huge, huge difference. Also, something to think about is, in general, our folks are about, 18, 19 years old. Sometimes we have some non-traditional students. Grit is one of those things that develops over time. So if we polled a bunch of 80-year-olds, they'd probably score about a 5, 4.9, because they've been through everything in life. They have 12 T-shirts to demonstrate how many things they've been through and how many events they've been through. So I thought that was interesting. Looking at here, too, we looked at grit overall and semester GPA, the resident GPA here at Ole Miss, and then the overall GPA, which for some folks did include transfer work. And again, a very small correlation. So it's significant, but it's not like something, ungodly, like a 0.7, where it's like, okay, grit is definitely the answer. I think grit is definitely a huge thing to think about, but there's still a lot of factors that come into play with this. What's also interesting is in terms of snapshots of time, semester GPA, is about 15 weeks. Resident GPA, of course, for these folks, could be for the psychology students even probably larger, well, usually freshmen, sophomores, et cetera, overall. all this is to say is that you get a higher correlation, more robust correlation, the more time you spend, which kind of indicates grit is one of those things that takes time to develop. All right, so we'll let you take the grit test because we're running out of time at your convenience, but let me go over some of these items. Has anyone taken the grit test before? Okay, great, awesome. So grit test, let me show you here. If you Google 12-item grit scale, University of Pennsylvania, item grit scale. That's okay. Okay, so we've got 12 items here, and so what you can do is take this, and I give this to my 105s, I give this also to my 101s. I've done presentations on this kind of thing, and I always tell people, this isn't to make you freaked out. Like if you get a score you're not liking, don't get into that fixed mindset of you can never be gritty, because we want you to develop yourself, find what you're passionate about. And so in terms of resources here on campus, the Career Center is a great way of helping cultivate that passion. If people don't know what to major in, that of course is going to probably impact how gritty they are in college, because if they're always trying to fit themselves into some sort of scenario that doesn't match their personality, then that is going to impact their GPA. So Career Center is great. Counseling Center, as a counselor too, I advocate for that, because sometimes when life happens and people aren't feeling like themselves, then they're naturally not going to perform their best. If you look at this grit scale here, I have overcome setbacks to conquer an important challenge. New ideas and projects sometimes distract me from previous ones. My interests change from year to year. Setbacks don't discourage me. I've been obsessed with a certain idea or project for a short time, but later lost interest. I'm a very hard worker. You can probably see a lot of Will Smith in here. Set goals, but later choose to pursue different ones. Difficulty maintaining my focus on projects that take more than a few months to complete. I finish whatever I begin, etc., etc. Now, some things that can impact this in terms of how you want to, if you want to take this and rate yourself. Some of these are reverse scored items, so you have to just kind of double check that. And again, the max score you can get is 5, which is extremely gritty, and then 1, not at all gritty. And what's really cool is Angela Duckworth has come out with a book on grit. It's a very interesting paperback book, so it's not too expensive, but I highly recommend it if you want to take a look and read that. But that's kind of grit in a nutshell. Do you have any questions for us?
I wanted to clarify something too about grit and emotional intelligence. There are measurement instruments like this one that are out there, but we've had discussions, and one of the things to remember, especially with emotional intelligence and grit, like I said, these are measurements that are based on right now, and if you had a bad day, your results are going to be different. A lot of the emotional intelligence instruments that I've used over time, there's a debrief after, so the explanation after the instrument that makes clear that, hey, this does not define you in any way. It's a better way to understand, and let's talk about it in person for about 20 or 30 minutes at least to kind of go through it. And one of the things with emotional intelligence is when I've had those debriefs with folks about things that are opportunities for development, something comes out, oh, well, that impacted your score. Just like the ACT score, when you take it and you've been sick all week, then your ACT score is different, just like any other test. But especially with emotional and soft type things, those it may not get at it at all. I don't do well on the grit scale, but I consider myself gritty. But it varies. I mean, if I were to take it right now, I'd probably be more gritty because I've got some things going on that there's a push going on in certain directions. But maybe 2 weeks ago, it's not the case. So anyway, just want to make that clear.
That's a good point. Yeah. And there is something too. We looked at social desirability, which is what Patrick was talking about, where sometimes people will score themselves in a way that looks a little bit more gritty than what they actually are, because we don't like to think of ourselves as non-gritty people. And so that's something to think about too. We did find a correlation with that and grit too.
So I'm underselling myself. Maybe that's it. In terms of grit, because I've taken it probably 5-6 times, and 2 or 3 of the times I've been pretty mediocre on grit. So
You could be a good case study. We'll
No.
test you for additional grit times. Other questions?
Can I share something with you real quick?
Yeah.
I just was telling you when you walked in here, the granddaughter
Right.
that I was talking about that got the job,
Yes.
it took her 7 years to get through college because at 19 she married, a year later she had a little boy, a year later her mother died at the age of, when Emily was like 21 or 22.
Wow.
And she just refused to quit until she got her degree.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's
I just about
yeah.
cried when you were talking about
Oh,
it.
wow, yeah. I mean, that's a primary example of someone who's resilient and also gritty, and just to be able to, it's very inspirational to have that kind of story. So thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Patrick, when you were talking about mindset and impulse control and those sorts of things, have you looked at the research brain science research that says that particularly in males, that the part of the brain that makes decisions and can anticipate consequences is not fully developed till mid to late 20s? So sometimes when I ask a 19-year-old young man, what were you thinking? His answer is, I wasn't thinking, and he's exactly right.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't anticipate where the decision was going to lead him. So is there a connection between all that research?
Yeah, and that's a good point, and I'm not as familiar with that. We had Camp Best, who was going to present on mindfulness, which is a good tie in terms of that. We've worked together before, but he wasn't able to do this, but I believe he's more than willing to come to classes, and if you haven't heard his talk on mindfulness, we might actually have it recorded from last year, but he talks about the, and forgive my lack of science knowledge, but the amygdala and how it fires off. And these days, with your cell phones and constant distraction, it's just constantly being stimulated. And so that has an effect on, obviously, decision making and the ability to be mindful in a situation where you're trying to accomplish tasks and goals. So, and that's part of it, but I'm not as familiar with some of the other research, but he's an expert, and I'm sure he'd be willing to share the slide presentation. So I'll make sure that we provide you the access to that, because it's really an impactful thing to go through his mindfulness training. How many of y'all have gone through it? I know a bunch of you have. So where you sit and you focus in and you're quiet and the distractions are not there, which is just, and as you get older and you develop, then you're able to better have the capacity of that. And, the students that come here, they're going to get here at that age. And so it's, what do you do? But yeah, I'm not as familiar with it as probably he would be, but it's good. But I think that's it. Do y'all have any other questions? Did y'all have any comments? Because I know that Mariana and Rachel for sure have been doing a lot of studies on grit, and Alex, I didn't know you were in the class too. So, and there are a lot of studies too. One of the big things, I mentioned this at the beginning, is because the struggle that we have in our office, and I know others, is trying to find out if there's something going on, what is it? And requires investigation and research. So, don't make the assumption that it's grit, because someone could be really gritty and then there are other barriers that are there. I mean, it's very individual, it's very life experiences, it's very everything that a person is. And so having the student, and that's what we've talked about too, I think some of you that have come to the coffee workshops or meetings that we've had, just to introduce you to the class, is that if you can form that relationship with the student and then they form relationships in the class with other students, then that's really a big deal with this class, and you're really accomplishing what the founders of this course would want you to do. Because then in a crisis situation, they're going to come to you or they're going to come to others in the classroom, and then you're really impacting in a positive way. So anyway, great. Did you have anything else? Well, thank y'all so much.
Thank you.